So we've been talking through the 6 streams of Christianity on the blog the last couple of weeks, basically through Advent. And today is different. We're going to keep on focusing on those things. So each week of Advent at LCC right now, we are looking at one of the 6 primary streams that came together to form the mighty river of Christianity, that have carried us through and been a part of who we are as a church as a whole. We started out with the contemplative tradition, which we're calling the prayer-filled life. We moved on then to the holiness tradition, which we're calling the virtuous life. And last Sunday, we talked about the social justice tradition, what we're calling the compassionate life. In the next 3 weeks, we'll be looking at the charismatic tradition, we're calling the spirit-empowered life. We're looking at the incarnational tradition, which we're calling the sacramental life, and we're looking at the evangelical tradition that we're calling the word-centered life. Now, none of this is original to me. Richard Foster is the one who put this all together in his book about the different streams, but another man put together an Advent liturgy, and he saw in the Advent story different characters that reflected each of the different streams. So that's been what our sermons have been about. Last Sunday, as I said, we talked about the social justice stream, which is the compassionate life, and we likened that to John the Baptist and his time together. As I ended the sermon on Sunday, though, I felt like I had to shortchange some of Richard Foster's how-to section of the compassionate life. The Advent character that best symbolizes this life, as I said, was John the Baptist, but in this particular step, this how-to section, at once it reminded me of John's father, Zechariah. So I want to think about the story of Zechariah as we look at this first step on how to live the compassionate life, how to be part of the social justice stream. Each day of this week, we're going to share a different view, a different step on things we can do to be part of the social justice stream. So I want to take a look at Zechariah's life and see what it has to teach us about this first step, which is allowing God to choose and use you for something amazing. Zechariah was a priest. He was working in the temple. He was one of a whole lot of different people who would work in the temple and just keep it up and repair it and do the daily offerings and such. Zechariah, we're just going to call him Zach. Zach was a righteous man, which meant a whole lot more than just being a good guy. If you remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about Joseph, Jesus' father, as being a righteous man. And we said he carried this title of tzaddik. This is a word that meant more than just being a good guy. This title of tzaddik meant that you meticulously followed God's laws in the Old Testament. This title was worn with pride by a select few in any community. And what it meant was that you were a righteous man, and therefore God would bless you. But Zach, the tzaddik, was confused. See, the greatest blessing that anyone could receive in the midst of that culture was to have a good, strong son to carry on your family line, to care for all the people that you left behind when you passed away. But see, Zach's wife, Elizabeth, was barren. She was cursed by God, is the way that they thought of it. If you were barren, it must have been because you did something bad, and so God cursed you. And she was cursed to never bear children. So what about Zach's careful righteousness? He had followed all of the virtuous life diligently his entire life and found himself cursed, not blessed. He was confused by this. Now, one day, it was Zechariah's turn to enter the holy place in the temple, the inner sanctum, where very few went. And so he would go there, and he would be able to offer incense on the great altar of incense, created and put together following God's plans given to Moses himself. And so he would go and offer prayers, offer incense on the altar. This was a very special blessing for Zach. And Zach was really proud to be chosen for it. But as he entered the holy place, he got there and he found that he wasn't alone. He instead was met by an angel who told him that very soon he would have a son. Oh, and what a son he would have. Talk about being blessed by God. His son, John was to be his name, said the angel. This son was to be a Nazarite from birth. Now, people could choose to take a Nazarite vow, but John would be a Nazarite from birth. And this was a sign of devotion of this person to God, which meant three things. He would never cut his hair, he would never drink wine, and he would never touch anything dead. And by following these rules his entire life, he would be a Nazarite. And because of that vow, he would be filled with the Holy Spirit, even in the womb. Back in those days, the Holy Spirit only came on certain people for a certain purpose and for a certain time. John, on the other hand, would be filled with the Holy Spirit his entire life, and this was something brand new that God was doing. More than that, he would take the role of Elijah, the prophet, one of the heroes of old. Every single year, Zechariah and all of his family and all of his people had celebrated the Seder meal to remember when they came out of Egypt, no longer slaves, but a free people. And at the end of this Seder meal they celebrated every year, there was a time when they would go outside and look around to see if Elijah had shown up to tell them the Messiah was coming. And this angel said, Zechariah, your son will fill that role. He will be Elijah, proclaiming the coming of Jesus Christ, with the coming of the Messiah. He didn't give his name. John would fill that role, and finally, he would be the herald of the Messiah. But Zechariah, he couldn't believe that maybe he could do something so great as this, as to bear and raise the forerunner of the Messiah, the Elijah who was to come. I mean, after all, he said, Liz and I are too old to bear children, and I'm just a simple priest. And so Zechariah was taught a lesson, as we know from the story, about doubting God's choices. And so Zechariah was voiceless until John was born. And John, would not only give a voice back to his father Zechariah, but John would go on in his life to become a voice for the voiceless throughout his entire life and ministry. So the question I have in this first week's lesson is this: do you suffer like Zechariah from a belief that God could never use you to do something great? If so, I want you to think about this. You're not doubting yourself. You're doubting God. Because when we doubt God, we can't accept his call to speak his words to this world, to bring his justice to bear on this world's systems, and to be that voice for the voiceless as he has called us to be. So hear this, folks. You have a voice, and you have a platform, and you have privilege and the power to be heard. So don't be like Zechariah and doubt God's choice of a messenger, even if it's you. Instead, be like John and become that voice for the voiceless. All right, we're going to talk about different ways that we can follow this stream every single day. So tomorrow, join us again for the next one. All right, be a voice. Bye-bye.